Shalom and welcome to this special edition of the Middle East Report, where we have a special interview with Liz Hirsh. You may remember her. She was on the Middle East Report back in February, telling the remarkable and inspirational story of how she helped to bring Abigail home, who was kidnapped by Hamas as a 3-year-old, and how through her help and campaigning she was able to convince the Biden administration to bring her home. So we'll be having an update on how Abigail is doing, but also we will be discussing the plight of the remaining hostages as we long and pray for them to return safely to their loved ones. Liz, warm welcome back, I should say, to the Middle East Report, and I want to thank you for the interview I recorded with you back in February of this year, telling the remarkable story of Abigail, who's 3 years old, who's a family member, who was kidnapped by Hamas on October the 7th. But we thank and praise God that she returned home safely without her parents. But you're here to give us an update on her situation, and an update on the situation regarding the hostages. But can you also share a little bit as well, because you've had a busy time here in the UK. You've been up in Scotland with the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, UK, working with Glasgow Friends of Israel as well. So 2 joint events in Scotland, in Edinburgh and Glasgow, followed then by speaking in Belfast and then in Dublin, Republic of Ireland. So you've been very busy. So I'm very grateful that you could be here. And I'm just so impressed with everything that you've done and for the way that you are campaigning on behalf of the hostages. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. And Liz, can you just share a little bit about your background, because you've got an incredible Jewish background growing up in Los Angeles, in California. But can you just make special mention of your parents? So your father, Stanley Hirsh, was a publisher of the Jewish Journal and president of the Jewish Federation of Los Angeles, and your mother Anita also was a big campaigner to help release Soviet Jewry from the clutches of the Soviet Union.
Yes, I mean, for myself and my siblings, we were raised not by being told what to do, but by watching what our parents did. And my father was the Federation president, Jewish Journal chair, and he also saved the Jewish television network when it was going out of business. And for my father, since he was a little boy, this idea of being a Jew, but also supporting Israel. And I'll just say this, which is, I thought about this recently, one of his best stories was a memory of his that he was a little boy, like 9 or 10, and he came from a very poor immigrant family, walking through the streets of New York with a little tzedakah box, a metal box, collecting money, collecting coins that he understood were going to be taken and sent to support Israel. This is back in the 1930s.
Wow.
And I think about that moment where they had nothing. He was a Jewish boy whose family had nothing, literally very poor. And he was raising money at that moment for Israel. And then that became part of who he was, and that was very important. My mother also was an immigrant. Her family came through the western part of the United States from Harbin, China. They were Russians that came that way. And she was fluent in Russian. And it became her passion to help Soviet Jews that were being held back from emigrating out of the former Soviet Union, but also were persecuted. And what she did was she trained people to go to this former Soviet Union and bring these people supplies, even the basics of medicine that they weren't afforded, that they could not get, but also things to learn about their Judaism and things to be able to be part of the world. Because once they declared that they were Jewish and they wanted to emigrate, they were either imprisoned at their homes or imprisoned in real prisons. And this was a movement, and she was very important in very motivated to train people to go to Russia and bring supplies carefully. I went with her 2 times. So it was very powerful, and it was a lesson in how we take care of other people.
Absolutely, and of course, Natan Sharansky is the famous leader of the Jewish community there in the former Soviet Union. So share with us the impact that would have had when you actually met these Jewish people from the Soviet Union, because we know that ever since kind of Lenin took power in the October Revolution of 1917, any religion was outlawed apart from the state, which would have been the Russian Orthodox state, and the Jewish community had to hide their Jewish identity. Share with us what it was like to actually then sit down and to meet members of this Jewish community in the former Soviet Union.
It was meeting our people. It was meeting people that were families, that were really just wanting to live life and celebrate and be Jewish. I'll tell you a story about Natan Sharansky. There's a picture that I have in my house that was my mother and father and my older brother at a rally in Washington, D.C. when he was a refusenik, and they were there. And then in 2014, when we were at a march for the hostages and for anti-Semitism in Washington, D.C., Natan Sharansky was there. And I said to him that my other memory of the mall was that my parents were there fighting for his release many, many years before. But for me, I know some of these families still in Israel, and I have seen them. These are people that my mom and my dad helped, and they now live in Israel, and they are older, and their kids have grown up in Israel, and they have grandchildren now in Israel. And that's just, it gives me the chills, because that is a beautiful statement, and that is what keeps Israel strong.
Amazing. And also share with us your experience, because you're a passionate Zionist. You and your family moved to Israel in 1992, Israel, LA. Just share with us what it was like living in Israel and fulfilling the Zionist dream of returning home to the ancient covenant homeland flowing with milk and honey.
For myself, living in Israel, raising my kids there was something I never imagined. And then I got there, and I had to learn the language, and I had to learn the culture, and Israelis are tough. And the one thing is that the first thing the answers a lot of time is no. But then you keep pushing, and the next thing they're doing is giving you a hug, because that's the Israeli spirit. And I married into a family, a huge Iraqi Jewish family, learned so much about their struggles and their emigration, their exodus from Baghdad when they were persecuted, and then them coming and the different ways they came to Israel. Some went to kibbutzes, some went to the big cities. And for me, it was this big family that we spent a lot of weekends with and learning about theirs history. And then I also had the sister-in-law who lived on a kibbutz called Kfar Aza, which we've talked about, and that's where my niece and her husband were murdered on October 7th, and their baby Abigail was stolen and kidnapped. But for me, growing up, raising my kids and living in Israel was a lot about spending time in this beautiful kibbutz along the border with these Jewish people that just wanted to live in peace with their neighbors, and in so many ways supported the neighbors living in Gaza. And so for us, October 7th was a betrayal. It was devastating. But for me, going to this kibbutz was always about what Israel was really about, which was people working the land and loving each and every piece of this small little land they were given, and doing what they could to make their lives and the lives of their children and their families beautiful.
Absolutely, and having spent 3 months on a kibbutz Ein Shafet in the north with the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, best summer of my life, that one, back in the summer of '96. And there's a wonderful community amongst those kibbutzniks, which is very special. And probably I was the only one that was able to reach out to the community very well. And I was adopted by a family, and the father was a massive, passionate football fan, I'll translate that into American English, a big soccer fan. So I could.
What team?
Arsenal.
Arsenal.
And a big England fan as well. So we'd spent hours talking about football, which is great. And he'd give me beer and ice cream, and all the rest of the students were jealous of that relationship. But that's very cool. But going back as well, because you also, but I didn't know until afterwards, but you've been very influential within the Democrat Party. Share with us how in July of 2022 you were appointed by President Biden to be part of the United States Commission for the Preservation of America's Heritage Abroad. Share with us what that is and what it entails, but also the importance of this particular role, and to serve the US government and the United States.
Sure. First, it is an honor to be on a commission. And this commission is very special, the Preservation of American Heritage Abroad. And truly what this commission does, and there are people appointed by Republican and Democratic presidents, and we work together, and our goal is to memorialize the lives of Jews and those others whose lives were taken during the Holocaust. So we basically raise funds privately and work with the US government to memorialize mass graves, memorials, so that people that were killed in Central and Eastern Europe, their lives don't disappear, but their lives have meaning, so that when people go to whether it's community centers or cemeteries or grave sites, that they know who was killed there and what took place. So for myself, this is a very personal place to be and serve, and it's an honor. And our chairwoman, Leslie Weiss, has been doing this for many years, and to learn from a woman like herself, whose mother is a Holocaust survivor, and to watch her lead, and to have very diverse people on this commission, but to know that our goal and that the US government's goal is to memorialize in such a beautiful and important historical way lives that were stolen, murdered, 6 million people. And for children growing up in those regions, to not be able to say that it didn't happen or not to understand it, to be able to go and visit and understand what took place in the history of their cities and their towns. So for me, that is a big honor and something that is very important to me. And you said one other thing, which is very true, that before October 7th, I was in the Democratic Party helping to elect women, specifically women. It was very important to me to have women leaders. But one of the things, Simon, that I understood on October 7th was that I woke up and I was an American. It didn't matter which side of the aisle I was on before. And it was really about how do we work together as Americans to support getting back these hostages, but also how to support Israel. And I'll just back up and say that before this, I had started a podcast called the Capital Coffee Connection Podcast. And my goal, this was before October 7th, was to reach out beyond being a Democrat and talk with Republicans and Democrats in America, leaders, about their heart and humanity. Because what I understood was that we weren't speaking to each other, and we were otherizing and making it very hard for us to work together and to listen. And so this podcast gave me an opportunity to speak with somebody like leader Steve Scalise and leader Hakeem Jeffries, a Republican and a Democrat, but not about politics and policy, but about heart and humanity. And then October 7th happened, and what I understood was this was the way we needed to work together. We don't have to always agree, but we need to speak and we need to listen. And so for me, when you talk about this commission, being on a commission with very different people, this podcast where I speak with people from both sides, but this hostage work to release these people, and there are 50 people still being held hostage as we speak today, 640 plus days they've been held hostage, 20 young men, 21 that are alive. We need to keep talking to everyone.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you for bridging that huge political divide that we've seen in the United States between the Democrats and the Republicans, and reaching out to humanity. But this story as well is about Abigail. Just referring to my notes here, it's Abigail Mor Edan. She's an American Israeli and family member of yours, and her parents are Roee and Smada, who were living on that beautiful kibbutz known as Kibbutz Kfar Aza in southern Israel, next to the Gaza Strip. Share with us something about Abigail's parents, but also Abigail as well, for those of our viewers who missed our last interview back in February.
So I met Abigail's mother, Smada, my niece, when she was a little girl like Abigail.
Oh, wow.
And she was a quiet, shy little girl. She was the youngest of 4. My sister-in-law and her husband lived on this kibbutz since they were very young. They'd been there many, many years, and they raised their 4 children there. And then they were living there with their 2 daughters and their families. 2 of the kids, a daughter and a son, had left the kibbutz. And Liron and Zoli, my other niece and nephew, were living on the kibbutz on the other side with kids a little bit older, twins that were 12, Zohar and Imbar, and a little girl, Daniela. But they were all very close, and they spent a lot of time with Smada and her husband, Roee, and Abigail and her brother and sister, Michael and Amalia. They were like a little team in this kibbutz. Now keep in mind, this kibbutz had only about 700 people, so it was a very small community. But this family had been there since the beginning. And Smada and Roee, all they wanted to do was raise these children, live in this beautiful place. Roee was a photographer. He worked for Ynet, which is a news agency in Israel, taking photos. And that morning, he ran outside when the missiles started to come and the sirens were blaring, because he had done that many times. And he had taken the photos. and then reported it to Ynet. But on this morning, he actually took photos of terrorists paragliding in.
Oh.
He ran back, but before he could get back, terrorists had entered the house and murdered my niece Smada in front of 3 little children, a 3-year-old named Abigail, a 6-year-old named Amalia, and a 9-year-old named Michael. These 3 children ran outside. Their father picked up Abigail, and they all started to run, and he was murdered by these terrorists, and he fell onto Abigail. Michael and Amalia, 6 and 9, ran home, locked themselves in a closet for 14 hours. Nobody came for them. No IDF, no one. They got on a call for about 12 hours with this beautiful woman named Tamar Schlesinger, works for a group called United Hatzalah. And this woman is remarkable. And she said that morning she knew there was something happening, and she opened up her WhatsApp. And this is a religious group, this United Hatzalah. They don't use telephones on Shabbat.
Because it was Shabbat and
Saturday morning.
Torah as well, wasn't it?
But she said it was open, and she knew there was something. And she said, I can be there. And she answered the first call. And that was talking to Michael and Amalia, a 9 and a 6-year-old, my niece and nephew, locked in a cupboard with a cell phone. Their mother's body there, laying there, alone. This woman talked to them for 12 hours, saving them. Terrorists were coming in and out of the house. They smelled smoke. And she kept them calm, and she kept them safe. So when you ask about that day, across the kibbutz, Liron and Zoli, they were alone. They were with their 3 children. That morning, Zoli looked out the window, and he saw a woman he knew with a 1-month-old infant running. He grabbed them and brought them in. Her husband had been murdered that morning. She had nothing. She was in a nightgown with a baby, 1 month old, no diapers, no food. They spent 28 hours, terrorists coming in and out, fighting everywhere outside, and they could not get out for 28 hours. So I want people to understand what happened on October 7th. We are focused on getting the hostages out, but even you mentioned early on, 367 young people slain, raped, and murdered at a music festival, dancing in the desert, celebrating peace and love. These terrorists came and murdered them. This is what happened on October 7th. And then Abigail, she actually survived. And by miracle went to a home. But terrorists went to that home and took her and this family into Gaza. And she was a hostage for 51 days. So for people, one of the things that I did was I wrote a book called Saving Abigail that you referred to. Because for me, what was important was to show that this is the face of a child whose parents were murdered in front of her, and then she was stolen, kept in a dark room with no noise, could not speak, no food, no toys. You know, children play, they laugh, they have screens, they have phones, nothing, but silenced. And so for me, Simon, it has now become something of really needing to reach out and tell people in the world this truth, because people have tried to take away this truth. And for myself, and I know for you and so many in our communities, it is now our obligation and our commitment to making sure that October 7th is a date and historically the truth is told about what happened, and that this was a massacre, a humanitarian crisis, a terror attack perpetrated by Hamas terrorists upon, yes, Israelis, but people from over 30 nations, 5 religions. They murdered and kidnapped other Muslims. So for me, this is not just about, oh, I wrote a book, but this is about making sure that people know a story about October 7th that sits in their heart and that they can share with others.
So let's go to this excellent report put together by the Israeli Foreign Ministry that looks at the plight of children. Many of the children who were kidnapped, like Abigail, and taken back to that hellhole that is Hamas. And when we see the war raging in Gaza, we know that our mainstream media likes to forget about the children, particularly the Israeli children who were kidnapped by Hamas on October the 7th. Take a look. And a very powerful illustration of how children were caught up in the October the 7th massacre. And like Abigail, we can't forget the children that were brutally murdered by Hamas on October the 7th, but also those like Abigail that were taken by Hamas against their will into Gaza as well. Very moving, and that illustration was very, very powerful, because people tend to forget what happened on October the 7th, because sadly we know that the narrative moves on, and it's all about Israel's military actions in Gaza against Hamas. And all the context, which really gets me so angry, is the fact that the narrative takes place outside of the concept of October the 7th. It's like October the 7th never happened, and our mainstream media don't give the context or the history that led to Israel's ground incursions into Gaza to destroy Hamas. And we've got to also understand that the people of Gaza are going to be so much freer and better off free of Hamas and this vile, evil terrorist organization. Share with us your thoughts on October the 7th, because this is very real for you. You have the connections there. You know those communities. I've seen those communities as well, and they're beautiful communities in the south of Israel along that Gaza corridor. And to know what happened to them on October the 7th and their communities is just beyond horrific. It's like, and going to those places, it's like seeing the Holocaust once again, but this time in the 2020s.
Look, after Abigail was released on the third day of the release on November 26, she turned 4 as a captive. This child's 4th birthday was as a hostage in Gaza. A week later, I got to Israel to be with the family. And a few days later, I said, I want to go see Kibbutz Kfar Aza, where they were taken, where my niece was murdered. And my niece, Liron, said, why do you want to go there? And I said, because I need to bear witness. I need to see it. And I took these photos of houses that had been burned, bullet-ridden homes of young people, old people. I went into the house of my niece, Smada. I saw the cupboard that Michael and Amalia hid in for their lives, the overturned furniture, the kitchen that morning was a Shabbat, Saturday morning, a holiday, Simchat Torah, and you could just see time stopped. It was like any of our breakfast, messy, a little with cups and everything everywhere, but a dishwasher that was full, a cupboard that had things up top. Simon, I needed to understand this was just one home, this was one community, and it was devastating. And this happened all along the border. Also, it was very clear that nobody came to save these people for hours. It was a catastrophe, starting with 3,000 terrorists who came in with the goal to murder, kill, destroy, and to kidnap. So when you talk about people forgetting or not wanting to acknowledge what happened on October 7th, I bring it up every time I speak because my niece and her husband were murdered. They were 2 people of over 1,200 people that were murdered on October 7th. Smada, my niece, was one of 46 Americans murdered. Abigail was one of 12 American-Israeli families stolen. And I don't think people get it. They look, like you said, as where we are now. And one of the interesting things that the majority of hostage families, and I for certain have said from the beginning when I learned that Abigail was a hostage, anytime I did press, anytime I spoke here in Qatar, in the US, if Hamas would release these hostages, the fighting would stop.
Absolutely.
And then the people living in Gaza, the children, who pains me, any child that is suffering, killed, starved, just as Abigail was starved and her family and other children were killed, It's not a competition of pain, but it needs to start with the release of the hostages. They were stolen. And that is what people have forgotten. And for me, that is the message. If I could give a message to the world, is tell Hamas to release these hostages. If they had taken these hostages from here in the UK or in Ireland and done this mass murder, the British people would not be silent. The people in Ireland would not be silent. But it's somewhere else far away, and they can otherize it. And so for me, I can't not speak honestly, but what I do know is if this was in their neighborhoods, 3,000 people came in and murdered their families and their neighbors and their communities, they wouldn't forget 640 days later what happened on their October 7th.
No, exactly. And the danger is if the world remains silent, the same thing is going to happen to the West, the United States, Britain, if we don't fight against this radical Islamic extremism that were responsible for the biggest massacre against Jewish people since the Holocaust on one single day. Share with us as well, I know we covered this in our last interview, but I think it's very, very important to tell as much as Abigail's story again as a reminder of what she went through and how she's become so symbolic now with the hostages and what happened on October the 7th. So share with us what happened to Abigail when she was in Gaza. Do you know anything of what happened, her conditions, who held her, and the conditions that she was in? You mentioned that she was left in a dark room, she had no toys. What was her condition, and what do you know about her time whilst being a hostage in Gaza?
Look, she was 3 years old. And I write about it in the book because I also wanted Abigail to know that people understood what she went through when she gets older, but also to tell the story in Saving Abigail of all the people that were fighting for her. Because this child with the 3 Brodich children, another 4-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 10-year-old, with this amazing, beautiful woman named Hagar Brodich who took care of Abigail like one of her own. They were silenced. Every night, bombs were dropping all around them by the IDF. The building they were in was destroyed. Damn it. One of the little kids was injured. They were moved. But the one thing that I know for Abigail, and she knew her parents were murdered. So she spent 51 days knowing that. But this woman, Hagar, loved her and hugged her in a way that only a mother with a heart could do. But Abigail knows very well where she was. She knows she was in Gaza. She's very smart. And one of the things that we've learned is we have to listen and let the children speak when they're ready. You can't push them. But what I've also learned is that, yes, they didn't have food. They had no hygiene. They had to beg for a piece of toilet paper. They had to beg for some water just to clean, just to drink. 51 days. And then we talk about people 640 days. When you ask about Abigail, and I know what she was under for that 51 days, and here we are at 640 plus days, it's a miracle they're still alive.
Liz, just share with us how, because knowing your story, and your story is an inspirational one, and that of Abigail as well, her strength and her tenacity, and her sheer strength to be able to stay alive in those conditions and remain cool and calm despite the absolute nightmare horror situation that she was in. Share with us how really, in a sense, that you played a role like Queen Esther, that God had placed you in such a strategic position and place where you could campaign on behalf of Abigail and the rest of the hostages and have then access to the President Biden, to the Vice President Kamala Harris, to Antony Blinken, the then Secretary of State, and to others, and to be able to put the plight of the hostages at the forefront of Joe Biden's foreign policy objectives to bring the hostages home. Just share with us a story how that just opened up huge doors for you politically on behalf of the hostages.
Yeah, well, listen, originally, keep in mind, President Biden went to Israel within like a week of what this October 7th to show support.
And moved a US warship into
brought
the
2 US
Mediterranean.
warships and showed 100% that he talked about being a Zionist. And we, as the American families, had a very unique relationship with President Biden, Vice President Harris, and as you mentioned, Secretary of State Blinken, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, Special Envoy Brett McGurk. We had meetings with them once a month, many in the White House. I went to Washington, D.C. a week and a few days after October 7th before anybody got there, because I was an American. I was in Israel on October 7th, but I came back. And what I saw was that our U.S. government on Capitol Hill, Democrats and Republicans, have been and were at that moment and to this day meeting with hostage families, meeting with survivors since then, but we had the ear and the support of the U.S. government. And I know we hear Democrats and Republicans and who's good and who's bad, but for hostages, we have kept the story bipartisan. Absolutely. And that is hugely important. Definitely. But what we also understood was that President Biden, every morning, he reviewed the list of hostages and he asked what was going on, and he was an active participant in it. And he met with hostage families ourselves 3 to 4 times. I can't remember how many at the end, because we met at the first, right in December. But he also did a Zoom call with hostage families when I didn't even know Abigail was alive. He did a Zoom call with the families right in the beginning. And what we understood was that everybody gets busy in governments. You had to keep pressing it. You had to keep pushing it. But what I understood, meeting with people like Jake Sullivan and Brett McGurk, that they took this so personally. For them, hearing these stories, they cried. We saw it. When I saw Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State, go to Israel and meet with hostage families, the Americans, and then step outside and meet with the Israeli families and the international families, because there were 30 plus nations represented. To see him go out and shake hands with these people and hug them and be there for them, it gave me this understanding of the leadership of the US government. And it has continued with President Trump and with Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and with Adam Bowler, who does hostage affairs. And you know what, Simon? It gives me this strength to know that the US government, whether under a Democrat or a Republican, have shown incredible support for the hostages and for the nation of Israel.
Amazing. Which is an incredible story. And just share with us your relief when the first wave of hostages were released in November of 2023. That also included Abigail in that release. Share with us how you learnt that incredible news and then your response to it.
Yes, so the first day of the release, you know, we kind of got an inkling about a week and a half before there was a deal close. But again, I learned very early on, until you see your loved one in the arms of the family, you cannot believe it happens. But then there was a deal. And on day one, we were told the night before that Abigail wasn't on the list. But we knew other women and children were on it. And that was okay, because we needed to start. And you needed to see people come out, even if it wasn't your loved one, if it wasn't Abigail. Then day 2, and they came out. And then day 2, Abigail wasn't on the list. And my niece knew that her birthday was that first day. And that second day, when she did not come out, for my niece and for my sister-in-law, for all of us, I was in New York, they were in Israel. We just kept thinking, what did we do wrong? Why isn't she coming out? But then you see these women and children coming out, and we're blessed. The third day, the night before, we got a note saying that she was on the list. This was a Hamas prepared list. So we knew she was supposed to come out. And we were watching TV, American TV, Israeli TV, and we saw the vans, and then my phone rings, and it's President Biden calling to tell me he had just spoken to my brother-in-law in Israel that Abigail had passed into Israel. Wow. And even then, as thankful as I was to hear the President of the United States calling myself and our family in Israel, until a little bit later, when I saw Abigail in my niece Lerone and my sister-in-law Shlomit's arms, and that she was safe, I didn't believe it. And then started the process of being able to start life again, knowing her parents were murdered, but that Abigail, this miracle child, had come back and was going to be able to now live in our family and be this energy and this light that we had waited for. Nobody had slept, nobody had eaten, nobody had done anything other than just wait and pray for 51 days.
Incredible. So let's have a look now at this fantastic CBN news report, and this focuses on the actual day that Abigail was released from Hamas's evil clutches and she could return home to her loved ones in Israel. Take a look.
For the past 3 days, heartwarming scenes have played out here in Israel as families are being reunited after weeks of captivity since being kidnapped by Hamas. 14 Israelis were released on Sunday, including 4-year-old Abigail Edan, an Israeli-American. Hamas killed her parents in front of her during the massacre on October 7th.
I just spoke with President Biden with great excitement. Of course, also about the little girl, Abigail. What a joy to see her with us. But on the other hand, what a pity that she returns to the reality of not having parents. She has no parents, but she has a whole nation that embraces her, and we will take care of all her needs.
President Joe Biden took a direct interest in Abigail.
Though intensive U.S. diplomacy, she's now safely in Israel, and we continue to press and expect for additional Americans will be released as well. And we will not stop working until every hostage is returned to their loved ones.
So far, 40 Israelis have been freed, with more expected today for at least a total of 50. In Jerusalem and the West Bank, Palestinians celebrated the return of dozens of prisoners released in exchange for the hostages. Many of them committed attempted murder, stabbings, shootings, or threw Molotov cocktails. This Palestinian woman called for more kidnappings so more prisoners could be freed. It's likely more Palestinian prisoners and Israeli hostages will be released today. Israel's war cabinet is deciding whether or not to extend the ceasefire for up to 10 more days, with 10 hostages released for each day. That could prolong Israel's military campaign as much as 2 weeks.
I think every day that goes on with the ceasefire, it's going to be harder for them to restart the war machine. And that is exactly what Hamas intends. They understand that the longer this ceasefire goes on, the more pressure will build on Israel to continue that ceasefire indefinitely. And if they continue it indefinitely, then Hamas does not get wiped out and Hamas survives. That's their strategy here, I believe.
Despite the delay, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited IDF troops in Gaza and pledged total victory.
We're here in the Gaza Strip with our heroic fighters. We're making every effort to return our hostages, and at the end of the day, we will return everyone. We have 3 goals in this war: eliminate Hamas, return all our hostages, and ensure that Gaza does not return to be a threat to the state of Israel again.
So that was the news report from CBN back on November the 26th, 2023. Incredible to think that after all this time, there are still Israeli hostages still held by Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza. Share with us the different approach you think that President Donald Trump is taking in comparison to that of his predecessor, President Joe Biden.
So watching that is still so emotional. That was 19 months ago. There's still 50 hostages, 20 young men. And one of the things that President Biden said, and I know till the last day, was a great regret, really truly, was that he did not bring home all these hostages. But a month before the inauguration of President Trump, we went to meet with President Biden, the American families. And he looked at these families whose loved ones were still there. And he said, go and talk to the Trump administration. My team is working with the Trump administration. So you had Brett McGurk working with Steve Witkoff. You had National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan working with then National Security Mike Waltz. But what you also understood was Adam Bowler, who's the special envoy for hostages, was working with Roger Carstens. And they were committed to making sure that this transfer of power would keep in mind and in focus the hostages. And about a month after the inauguration, and we were at the inauguration, President Trump invited us to the inauguration, and we stood on that stage where he talked about bringing home all of the hostages. And I believe since that day, his commitment has been sincere. In the beginning, he was able to get that deal that brought home 33 hostages. First, young women who were taken on October 7th, and then others, both living and deceased. But that is a deal that President Biden could not get through. It was a deal that they had worked on, but President Trump was able to push both sides, Hamas and Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Israelis, to make a deal. We have seen, especially from Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and we met with him early on in Israel, and this man committed from a heart place, not just from diplomacy, but from his heart, that he was going to make sure that these hostages all came home. And he is tirelessly still working with President Trump to make this a reality. And so it's a little bit different because they have a different strategy. But the goal of bringing home the hostages is forefront in the minds of our leadership. And that, to me, is my hope, that that means that we will bring home these 20 young men alive. We will bring home 30 people that were murdered by Hamas from October 7th till present, that need to come home and be buried with dignity and love with their families. Because, Simon, until they all come home living and deceased, these families can't move forward.
Absolutely.
These people are suffering in Gaza, but their families, and they cannot move forward. Israel cannot move forward. And we here in the UK, America, all over, we cannot move forward. So for me, the focus continues to be bringing home all these hostages. And I do believe that President Trump, Special Envoy Witkoff, Adam Bowler, and their team, Marco Rubio, our Secretary of State, and their teams are very much focused, and this is their real commitment, is to bring home everybody.
What do you think it's going to take to bring the hostages home? Because, I mean, for the Israelis, this is very difficult, particularly for the IDF, because you have three main military objectives. Get the hostages home, to destroy Hamas so October never happens again, destroy their terror infrastructure, but also destroy these terror tunnels. And of course, Hamas use women and children and the elderly as human shields. They don't comply by the Geneva Convention. These are genocidal terrorist organizations that don't care about life. They certainly don't care about their own people in Gaza and putting them directly in the line of fire. So what is it, do you think, is going to take for those hostages to come home? Is it going to mean the total destruction of Hamas, or a ceasefire in which somehow members of Hamas survive in return for the hostages? Or is that too political?
Look, it's very political. But what I will say is that the hostages, I understand the three goals. Israel is stronger than it's ever been.
Absolutely.
Gaza is a mess. It's destroyed. And Hamas still exists. But they have been completely weakened. We saw with the Iranians being weakened, the fall of Lebanon, the fall of Syria, and President Trump and Witkoff and Marco Rubio and all of them doing this incredible work. But Israel has always had the support of the United States, with Joe Biden and with President Trump. Yes, people have said, well, he didn't do this or he didn't do that, but there has never been light between the Americans and the Israeli people and the nation of Israel. And we could go on and on, but I say that because America is standing with Israel. But Hamas, to get them as one of Prime Minister Netanyahu's goals completely out, that takes time. The hostages, they do not have that time. They need to be released. Those 20 young men, their lives, they don't have that time. And I'm a Jewish woman. I'm a woman who cares about humanity. I don't believe we leave people behind. The Jewish people don't leave people behind. And for me, it is making sure that they come home. Israel must be safe and secure. Israel is safer and secure than they were on October 7th. A great military and a governmental failure that was the murder of my family. But that is better now. That is safer now. The army is strong.
Absolutely.
Israel is strong. So all I say is we need to bring home the hostages. Hamas cannot continue to exist. I am 100% there. I'm not naive. But these people need to come home. Israel as a nation needs them to come home. The trauma of the people living in Israel, both directly and indirectly affected by October 7th, the only way they move forward is for all those people to come home. And you showed it on that video. The day that Abigail was released, the day that those young women were released back in January, those are days where the Israeli people and their souls, Jews, Christians, and Muslims living in Israel and around the world, were able to celebrate this beginning of healing. But until they all come home, the healing doesn't continue.
Absolutely. When I was last in Israel, I got very, very close Israeli friends. They're like family to me in Herzliya. And my very, very close friend, she's a mother of three beautiful young boys. They're football mad, which is great. So I play football when I go and see them. And she was showing me how her oldest one was having nightmares after October the 7th, this psychological fear that Hamas would come after them. And again, when we see that Israel is kind of vilified by our international press and media, they take out something and they miss the most important aspect, that there are real people in Israel, like yourselves, like Abigail's parents, those who have suffered horrifically on October the 7th, those who have had their fathers and their husbands and their sons have gone off to fight, destroy Hamas and Hezbollah, putting their life on the line to defend the state of Israel, and the national trauma that is in Israel, that Israel still hasn't had time to think and to mourn what happened on October the 7th because of the continual fighting against the Islamic Republic of Iran and their terror proxies, whether it's Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Houthis, Hamas, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards in Syria, and then recently that 12 intense days of conflict between Israel and Iran. And we forget the human aspect of this. Share with us, for our Christian viewers, how they can really reach out to Israelis, how they can reach out to the Jewish community, because at the same time, we've seen a pandemic of Jew hatred arise since October the 7th. Things that we have not seen since the 1930s and 40s, the rise of Nazism, the rise of fascism across Europe. And that is the warning to our nations, to our society, to wake up and defend and protect our Jewish community.
Yeah, so I'll start with the part that you just said, which is these are real humans, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim, living in Israel who are suffering. And for me, I think about football, soccer. My son is a huge football player, supporter.
Yep.
Tottenham.
Okay. I'll let you off.
Yeah, I knew you'll let me off.
I'll let you off.
Yeah.
Big rivalry.
And he learned to love them by living in Israel and having buddies that were from the UK that were Tottenham fans. Michael, who's now 10, my great nephew, locked in a closet, passionate soccer player, very good football player, really fast, really good. He's a little boy. Everything he went through, the one place that he finds a joy is being on that soccer field. This is what we need for the children in that region, is to be playing soccer together.
Absolutely.
And we need to figure out the direction so that children in Israel and in Gaza and in Jordan and in Egypt and in the Saudis, and they're playing soccer together. That is my vision. It is one that I work every day towards. But the reality is that in the meantime, people are in struggle. And one of the things that I heard over and over again when I was in Scotland and Ireland from people that were coming to these, I'm a Christian, but I love Israel. I went there and I volunteered. I volunteered with the IDF. I donated to this. ICEJ, giving money to trauma centers along the border for children, for the elderly, animal therapy programs. The work that ICEJ is doing to support Israel is amazing. But I'm not here to tell people to give money, but everyone can do something. And what I've learned from this, Simon, is we all do a lot, but after this, I learned I had to do more. I thought I was being so helpful and caring. when Abigail was stolen, I all of a sudden had to do so much more. And what I ask people to do is say, you're already doing so much, and thank you. Thank you for the love of Israel, Christians, Jews. I meet people who are Muslims, and they say that what they are seeing is painful to them. And they're talking about both sides, but they are very clearly seeing the pain and the suffering of the Jewish people and of their brethren living in Israel. Think about it, there's 2 million Muslims living in Israel.
Absolutely.
They're suffering.
Yep.
So when you ask that, like I say, keep supporting Israel. Keep supporting the Jewish people. Keep supporting the Israeli people. And in a short way, I talk about my book. Buy these books. Buy Saving Abigail. But also go buy other books that were written by others. Eli Sharabi, who was a hostage for 500 days, he wrote a book. Go buy these books. Because what I can tell you is if we can show the world that we are supporting the Jewish people and the Israelis and fighting against terror, we will be stronger. And what I also learned meeting with Christians and Jews and Muslims is that when we do this together, we actually have a greater power than all the screaming and the noise from those people that are anti. And the love that we bring together is really quite powerful.
Absolutely. A very, very important question. Since Abigail is released and since our last program back in February, how is Abigail doing? Because we all want to know how she is. Does she have kind of flashbacks of what happened, or is she surrounded by so much love that she's moved on from that?
Look, Abigail's living in the moment. She's 5 years old.
Yep.
She goes to nursery school. She has 5 older siblings. She and her brother and sister are part of this blended, amazing family. My niece and her husband, Roee and Smada, raising 6 kids.
Wow.
And Abigail is the youngest, but in many ways she kind of runs the whole group. She's very inquisitive. She's charming. She's a great dancer. She loves action. She can eat French fries. She can eat strawberries. She can dance. She can run. When the kids are playing, she wants to be with them. When you look at her, you see this child who's full of life and exactly what we want children, especially those who have been traumatized, to be able to have each day. We don't know what will be. We have no idea what her life will be, but as you said, right now she is given so much love and warmth and support that she gets to be a child. But she knows she was in Gaza. She knows that her mother and father were murdered. Those are things that no matter how normal she looks and how she acts, are part of who she is each and every day. And same for her brother and her sister. But they are loved, and it talks about that love. And so when I come to you and the work I'm doing, I'm not denying the hate out there, but I am going to keep putting love into this formula and into prayer and into support, because if we can do that, we will be able to win.
Amen to that. And share with us the personal love. We got 5 minutes left. Share with us the personal love that you received up in Scotland. You met some great friends of mine, Sammy and Vicky from Glasgow Friends of Israel. So a special mention to them. I know they watch the Middle East Report, and also the great guys from the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, UK, particularly Joanne and David Elms, and of course you met Brian Sylvester as well in Northern Ireland, and also the leader of ICJ Ireland in Dublin. Just share with us the kind of love that you received, particularly at these events in the synagogue and joint events, and be able to bring both the Christian and Jewish community together in love of Israel and love of the hostages, and in love and solidarity with our beleaguered Jewish community as well.
It starts with that word of love and light. And I learned a lot. You know, I went and spoke at each of these shoals and communities, and they were multi-faith. And what I loved was that there were people from so far apart, but coming together and being in community and really sharing love. And I spoke, but I listened and I learned, and I felt so nourished. And to see these people, and I know about the anti-Semitism that they face in their communities. But the one thing that I saw was that did not stop them. And what I also saw was that people were there, especially the Christian community, evangelical Christian community, saying, we're here for you. And it wasn't just the love of Israel, but it was understanding the suffering and the empathy that was shown, which for me was remarkable. And so, yes, I met incredible people, and these are incredible people, Jewish and Christian. But what it said to me was, this is a model of how we really need to try to keep working together, and not just here in the UK, but across the world, and especially for me being an American, how to make it work in America in that same way, because we can get much further. And so it was a day in each place. It was a lot of traveling, a lot of speaking, a lot of listening, but it was so nourishing that as exhausted physically as I am, emotionally and spiritually, I'm full.
Excellent. That's great news. And also a special mention to Paul, the director of ICJ Ireland as well. So share with us what it's like. We got about a minute and a half. Share with us like to be in kind of Dublin as well, because we know sadly that the Republic of Ireland has become so hostile towards Israel.
The people that I met, the people that I saw and I spoke with, are loving and caring people. And when I see and I know their suffering, and I heard about legislation that the government there wants to impose that basically fines people for buying something in Israel or in the West Bank, or when I hear about the hate of the Jewish people that the government has, for me, it says we just need to keep being strong and stronger together and keep showing love.
Amen.
Because that's going to overpower.
Definitely. Liz, it's been an absolute pleasure to host you again on the Middle East Report. Thank you so much for sharing with me and with our viewers. Please send our love to Abigail and to the rest of the hostage families, and just to let you know that you're not alone. We love you very much, we cherish you very much, and we will continue to fight and stand with you until all the hostages come home. So thank you for watching this very special edition of the Middle East Report. It has been emotional hearing Liz's incredible story. We are so grateful to God that Abigail is home, but we can't let up now until all the remaining hostages are home. Continue to pray for them. Continue to speak up for them. Wear the hostage badge, which is so important because it shows your love and support and solidarity with the hostage families. And we need to fight this hate with love. So thank you for watching this week's Middle East Report.